Whenever online games are brought up, people inevitably start talking about friends that they made while gaming. For me, things are no different. The year was 2010, and I was getting ready for some major life changes. I was about to leave home, headed off to university after 2 years in community college. But in this exciting yet turbulent time in my life, I had one constant keeping me level-headed: World of Warcraft. At the time, I was an officer in a respectfully sized player versus player focused guild called Tyrants of the Horde. As a group, we would regularly lead large-scale attacks on Alliance cities, with my Orc Death Knight Phelan often at the head of the pack. Our goal? To get everyone in the raid their Black War Bears, awarded for taking out all of the enemy faction's leaders. Among the people I met during this time was a Tauren druid named Babs. Babs and I would often spend our time online talking about the game, our lives outside of it, pretty much anything that came to mind. While I did help him get his warbearer on his secondary characters, I always promised him that he would get it on his main as well. Sadly, we never did. 2 days before I left for university, I received word from Babs' fiancé that he had passed away. Still, to this day, I often think about Babs in my quieter moments, often reminiscing and thinking about how remarkable it is that all these years later I would still remember someone who I never met in person. That is the power a game like World of Warcraft can hold, as millions of players all over the globe probably have their own stories about people they met themselves. But how did it get to be so big? How has its reach grown so vast? And how exactly has World of Warcraft managed to change the game's industry and the world at large? In the early days of PC gaming, there was one genre that was incredibly popular: the real-time strategy game. The genre saw players not directly controlling an individual soldier as one would usually expect in video games, but instead placed them in the role of a commander in charge of an entire armed force. Arguably, the first RTS was War of Nerves for the Magnavox Odyssey 2, released in 1979, but some other noteworthy entries in the genre include Populous, Shadow Sorcerer, Dune 2, and Herzog Zwei. Those last two are of particular note because they were favorites among the small development team at a little upstart game company called Blizzard Entertainment. Blizzard was founded in 1991 by 3 University of California graduates named Mike Morhaime, Alan Adham, and Frank Pierce. Originally going by the name Silicon and Synapse, the company started off by porting games other studios produced for other systems, such as Battle Chess 2, before developing their first 3 games: RPM Racing, The Lost Vikings, and Rock and Roll Racing. After these releases were met with rather positive receptions from critics and gamers alike, members of the development team started brainstorming ideas for an RTS game, feeling that there was a hole in the market since no major game in the genre had been released in a while. Unbeknownst to them, Westwood Studios, the creators of Dune 2, were at the time hard at work on the first entry in the Command & Conquer series, but that's a story for another video. Building upon the fantasy themes established in The Lost Vikings, Blizzard Entertainment released Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans on November 23, 1994. Fun fact, the original plan for the Warcraft series was to use the name Warcraft as a more generic RTS brand, not specifically sticking to the world of Azeroth. That's why you might hear some video game historians mention a proposed Warcraft Vietnam that never came to be. However, the game was extremely well received, and fans quickly started asking for a direct sequel, and they got just that only 2 years later on December 9th, 1995, when Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness was released. Warcraft 2 saw the world expanded quite a bit, with a ton of new lore written by Chris Metzen. Metzen had contributed a bit to the original Warcraft, but it wasn't until the second game that he really took charge of the fantasy setting of Azeroth. He would continue to be a major driving force not only within the Warcraft franchise, but all Blizzard games moving forward until he left the company in 2016. Warcraft 2 was even more of a hit than its predecessor and spawned an expansion pack called Warcraft 2: Beyond the Dark Portal, which added on new campaigns for both the human and orc factions, as well as a ton more multiplayer maps. The popularity of Warcraft 2, of course, made the continuation of the series inevitable. However, the next game to go into development was one that you probably have not played, let alone even heard of. In 1996, Blizzard Entertainment announced that development had begun on Warcraft Adventure's Lord of the Clans, a classic-style point-and-click adventure game that would put players in the role of Thrall, a young orc raised as a slave who escapes captivity and unifies the orc clans under one banner. The game was originally slated for release in the holiday season of 1997. However, that never came to be, as after a troubled development, the game was delayed and then eventually publicly cancelled in 1998. However, years later in 2016, a playable version of the game was leaked onto the internet, showing the world what they had missed out on 18 years before. Turns out, it really wasn't much, as most of the story beats were taken and used in the Lord of the Clans novel by Christie Golden, and the true sequel to Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, which saw release on July 3rd, 2002. Warcraft 3 brought the series into the third dimension, swapping out sprite work for low-polygon models. It also featured an upgrade to the storytelling, with in-engine cutscenes occurring not just at the beginning of missions, but sometimes during as well. And the story wound up being a big part of the popularity of the game among fans. However, the multiplayer is really what gave the game its staying power. Heck, people are still playing it to this day. Kind of. The Reforged remaster kinda messed with it, but that's not what we are here to talk about, so moving on. At nearly the same time, while some members of Blizzard's development team were working on Warcraft 3, others were working on a more ambitious project. Something that was building upon what the RTS games were doing, but taking it in a new direction. I'm of course talking about World of Warcraft. There's a time period that happened after StarCraft where we kind of split the teams down south into two separate teams. One of them was working on a project that would eventually become Warcraft 3, but it wasn't obvious at the beginning that that was exactly the way it was going to go. The other team was working on a totally different project, which didn't come to fruition, and we decided to stop development on it. What was that team to work on next? That's where the genesis of World of Warcraft came from. Those are the words of Rob Pardo, one of the designers on World of Warcraft, who also worked on Warcraft 3. I was the lead designer on the Warcraft 3 team. Alan Adam took the role of lead designer on the World of Warcraft team and was really driving the design of that project through the early days. We had a really interesting relationship because we didn't have a lot of other lead-level designers in the studio, so we spent a lot of time together co-designing a lot of things. During the early period, we focused a lot on Warcraft 3 design decisions. We'd have lunch every day and talk about that. As WoW was getting deeper and deeper, our discussions turned more and more to WoW. Like they did with the first Warcraft, the developers looked at other games within the massive multiplayer online role-playing game genre that they were fans of, specifically EverQuest, and tried to build upon the ideas that they liked and cut out the stuff they didn't. In fact, many of the designers were high-level EverQuest players, having led large guilds and such, so they had a pretty good idea of what made for a fun MMO environment. One way that WoW innovated over the other games from around the same time was its reliance on quests to not only help tell the story of the game, but also to streamline the leveling process, something that other games usually did via some combination of grinding and other such mindless activities. And the team would test out the effectiveness of this gameplay system and all of the others they developed when the game went into closed beta testing in March of 2004. The closed beta content came in waves, allowing players to test out small snippets of the game before hitting them with all there was to see within the base experience. Information that leaked out from the tests generated a massive amount of hype among fans of the franchise and genre alike. It really seemed like Blizzard was onto something. The hype hit a fever pitch when the game was finally released on November 23, 2004. It was met with near unanimous critical acclaim. GameSpot gave it a 9.5 out of 10, praising its large, open world and its user-friendly gameplay. Eurogamer gave it an 8 out of 10, lauding many of the same features as others, while pointing out that the questing system, while good for solo play, makes sticking with a group rather difficult. No matter what the review said, however, players went nuts for it. Over 2005 and 2006, World of Warcraft topped sales charts, making it the highest-selling game of those 2 years. So of course, Blizzard looked to continue the hype by releasing major content patches that added new things for players to do, causing them to stick around and continue paying their $15 a month. One of these updates, patch 1.7.0, Rise of the Blood God, which saw the opening of the game's first 20-person raid, is noteworthy, yes, but we don't really care about it for this video. What we do care about is the raid's final boss, Hakar the Soulflayer, and his corrupted blood ability. Now, normally what the ability did was it would attach to a player and deal a certain amount of damage over time. Then if the player got near anyone else, it would also spread to them, just like a disease. There was a little problem with this though. With the initial version of the ability, it could spread to Hunter and Warlock pets, who could then be dismissed while under the effects of the plague. Players quickly discovered this and started resummoning these inflicted pets in major population centers, causing anyone around them to become debuffed by it, eventually leading to their characters dying. Low-level players would die almost instantly. This led to cities being abandoned while players attempted to escape the outbreak. Dubbed the Corrupted Blood Plague Incident, this event so closely mimicked a real-world outbreak that scientists started studying what happened, using it as a model for human behavior during epidemics. This allowed them to better understand how these things spread amongst a population, including across international borders or whole continents. This research was even employed during this most recent pandemic. Not many games have the distinction of having their own files at the Center for Disease Control. It's kind of a big deal. Patches aside, the days of what fans would come to call vanilla would soon come to a close, as on January 16th, 2007, the game's first expansion pack, The Burning Crusade, hit store shelves and took players away from Azeroth to the broken world of Outland, where they would face off against the demonic Burning Legion. After that, on November 13th, 2008, the game's second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, launched. This expansion sought to wrap up the story of Arthas Menethil that began back in Warcraft 3 and added many quality of life improvements to the game that players had been asking for quite a while, such as the Group Finder, a tool that made finding other players to run dungeons and raids a lot easier. Later on in the game's life, this would prove to be a rather controversial addition, but regardless, it was here to stay. Over the next few expansions, major changes to the game would come and go as players became more and more vocal about what they wanted to see from the game. Cataclysm, released in December 2010, revamped the original zones that were released along with vanilla, bringing them more in line with the way Blizzard was currently designing quest areas. Mists of Pandaria introduced the Monk class and a few new casual-focused features such as pet battles, a mini-game akin to the mainline Pokemon games, and so on and so on. With the most recent expansion, 2020's Shadowlands, the developers at Blizzard felt that things were getting a little bit crazy in regards to some of the insanely high numbers players had to deal with, which is understandable. In vanilla, the level cap was a paltry 60. In Battle for Azeroth, the previous expansion, it was 120. To fix this, they implemented the game's first ever level squish, bringing players level 120 down to 50 and allowing them to hit the new cap of 60 by the end of the expansion's new areas. And that is sort of where World of Warcraft is sitting as of the making of this video. In regards to the MMORPG genre, it is undeniably the king of the hill. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have rivals and imitators. Final Fantasy XIV initially released September 30th, 2010, then re-released as A Realm Reborn on August 27th, 2013. There is a whole story there, by the way, that I highly recommend looking up. It's beyond the scope of this video, but trust me, it is interesting. It is probably the game's closest competitor, with players often jumping ship from WoW to the second online entry in the long-running JRPG franchise. And other major fantasy franchises have tried their own hand at the genre, following Warcraft's example. The Warhammer franchise, which is often cited as inspiration for the original Warcraft, tried with Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning in 2008. Conan the Barbarian got in on the action as well with Age of Conan Hyborian Adventures that same year. Even Star Wars tried to jump on the MMO wagon, twice actually. Star Wars Galaxy was actually released before WoW, but the infamous New Game Enhancements update attempted to simplify it to bring it more in line with what World of Warcraft was doing gameplay and systems-wise. Following later on was Star Wars The Old Republic, a game which basically replicates the general gameplay of World of Warcraft. So much so that it's often called WoW with lightsabers. I, as in the writer of this video, highly recommend it though. Tons of fun. Whether or not you are a die-hard fan of the game itself or just the genre as a whole, no one can deny the impact World of Warcraft has had on the games industry. With billions of dollars in total revenue, fans all around the globe, books, movies, comics, and more based off of it, it's no wonder that it has managed to last as long as it has, with no end in sight. If you are a total newcomer to the Warcraft franchise and want to get into all the lore and such, I'd recommend starting with Warcraft 3, and then heading into World of Warcraft. A lot of what happened in Warcraft 1 and 2 can be picked up based on things characters say in those two games, so it's not like you'd be missing too much, in all honesty.